Hello, mister. I hope you're really fine. Now I'm going to talk about the international exams. Especially, I'm going to talk about IELTS. But what is IELTS? Well, IELTS is the International English Language Testing System. This is one of the most popular certification of English, and this exam assesses the 4 English skills, such as listening, reading, writing, and speaking. What are the main purposes of taking this exam? Well, the first one that I wrote here is to apply for a job or university studies. Also, to certify English proficiency to graduate from college or university. And for us as Chilean people, it also works to apply for higher education in Chile, such as PhD, masters, among others. Well, every person who takes IELTS takes the same listening and speaking test. However, the reading part and the writing part are different for academic IELTS and general IELTS. Here you have the two different parts. Academic IELTS is for those people who want to apply for a job or universities. In other words, it would be for academic matters. On the other hand, we have general IELTS. This general IELTS is for those people who want to emigrate to an English-speaking country or want to measure the English language proficiency in an everyday context. Well, as I mentioned before, this test assesses the 4 skills of English: speaking, listening, writing, and reading. Here you have a writing part sample. Here you can see an example in which students have to answer the questions 1 to 4 by filling the blanks. But are there some types of bias in IELTS? Well, I could find some gender and cultural bias in this exam. Here you have the gender bias that I could find in the following sentence in a sample from the written part of the exam. For me, this corresponds to a bias since it is a word that kind of excludes women from the creation of, which is written here. In this case is language. Instead of using that word, it would be much more convenient to use the word humankind instead of mankind. Second, I found this cultural bias in the following text from a sample from the general writing task. As you can see, this statement asks about an opinion according to a topic. To start, it says in Britain and ask for an opinion about their own knowledge or experience. But what will happen in the case of the students or people from another culture, like Chinese or Latino people? Maybe their experience would be probably totally different from someone who lives in Great Britain. This is why it would be more difficult to answer that question for a person from abroad, Great Britain. Now I'm going to talk about the standardized tests. First, I'm going to reflect about this bias in IELTS, also the advantages and disadvantages of standardized tests, and finally, I'm going to give a final reflection. According to the first bias, the gender bias, I think that this word, mankind, can maybe establish a kind of a gap according to the male and female genders. Therefore, a single word can make the difference that would affect students' performance. This is why, if it affects students' performance, it would be probably that affect the test score. On the other hand, according to the second bias, the cultural bias, as I mentioned before, for students who are not from Great Britain, this means a disadvantage, I can say, as they wouldn't be familiar with this topic because they're not from Great Britain. And for those people who are from Britain, maybe it can be an advantage. This is why the performance of foreign people can be affected, and obviously the results consecutively. Now I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of standardized tests. First, the advantages. The first one says, through this test, a large number of students are tested at the same time, and also it allows identifying the areas for improvement and challenges presented by the school communities to increase the academic development. This can be really useful for schools in order to improve in those areas that are not so good. Talking about the disadvantages, the first one is that in this test, sociocultural factors are not considered, since students who come from low-income schools will probably not have the same result as those ones who come from a private school, because as you know, here in Chile there are many realities, and private schools in English, talking about the English subjects, they are better than in public school. Also, in some standardized tests, memorization and identification are mainly evaluated, more than cognitive skills that are much more relevant, such as analyzing, evaluating, among others. And finally, in some schools, they only focus on preparing students to do well, to have a great result, which obviously would be really stressful for them. And with this last point of disadvantage, I would like to make a short reflection. What would happen if I were a teacher? In my case, if I were a teacher, I would make a mixed class, either orientated towards the test itself and in relevant contents for the class. To be exact, I would use activities that motivate students to participate during classes, and also I would use samples so that they can practice for the test. In this way, it wouldn't be a boring class and they would not feel stressed about participating. So, that's my presentation. I hope you really liked. Thank you for your attention.